Welcome back, everybody, and we're back in the Book of Innovation. And I want to talk about today some models of innovation and also some of the stages that take place during the innovation process. So that's what we're going to focus on today. Now, I have a little video clip, and I'm going to try to incorporate at the beginning of our Thursday lectures on innovation some various clips on innovation. Today, I want to take a look at the DNA of innovative companies, and that's going to be really a segue into what we're talking about today. What is it about innovators that make them different? Or are they really different from us? So today we're going to take a look at the video clip on DNA of innovative companies, and then we're going to go into our presentation of the models of innovation and the stages of innovation. So let's go ahead and begin today with that.
Innovation is at the heart of economic development, and it's one of the core features of successful companies worldwide. We're joined by Hal Gregersen, who is the INSEAD Affiliate Professor of Leadership and who has just published a book on the subject of innovation. Who is an innovator? What are the features of an innovator? It's called the Innovator's DNA. Hal Gregersen, thank you for joining us. Can you tell us a bit about what is the fundamental feature of an innovator?
Innovators are people who behave differently and don't just think differently. So in other words, if I want to be like Steve Jobs and have this capacity to think differently, the fundamental message of Innovator's DNA is people have to behave differently. And so if we walked into Steve Jobs' world and walked around with him and followed him during a day, we could see him behaving in ways that will generate new ideas. So he observes the world really carefully. He talks to all different kinds of people. He's more than willing to engage in different kinds of experiments, constantly peppering the world and the people around him with questions that provoke people and challenge the status quo. And when Steve Jobs or anybody else behaves that way, acts differently, asks lots of questions, observes like an anthropologist, experiments constantly, networks for ideas, they're likely to get incredibly insightful ideas about new businesses, new products, new services, breakthrough processes, things that will make a difference for any company.
Well, you've identified, I think, 5 basic characteristics of the innovator, which you call the innovator's DNA. Could you elaborate, first of all, on these 5 characteristics? What are they?
Innovation starts with a question. So when I'm trying to figure out a new process in my organization, I'm trying to figure out a better service proposition for my clients and customers, if I'm trying to do those sorts of things, I've got a question. Why not this? Why couldn't we that? What's going on here? How could we do this better? How could we do this differently? And we don't have an answer to those questions. And so part of being an innovator is being able to generate the right question. The next piece becomes doing something with the question. So questions for question's sake is just being clever. I sit in my office, I ask clever questions, and they're not going to go very far when it comes to innovation. But if I get out of my office, take that question, make it active, go into the world, I might be someone like Jeff Bezos at Amazon. I'm an experimenter. That's just his DNA. That's how he approaches innovation. He's constantly trying to experiment with the world, try new things, try different things, asking questions as he does it, and he gets new ideas. Other people take a question, like Mike Lizardis at Research in Motion, the BlackBerry company, and essentially he idea networks. He talks to different people than who he is to get new ideas, and again in those conversations he's asking them lots of questions. Scott Cook, founder and CEO of Intuit, he essentially is an observer. He watches the world very carefully. He's always asking himself when he goes into a situation, what's surprising, what's unexpected that I didn't see before in this situation? It helps him generate new ideas. So when we take a question, combine it with an action like an observation, an experiment, or networking with people for ideas, then when we're pushed into a corner, we have to get a new idea about, again, a business, a product, a service, etc. Then when we're pushed in the corner, we have a smart idea, and we have a really creative idea, and often it's a surprising idea.
Now, you use the expression DNA, which implies that these qualities are innate in the people concerned, but you also suggest that it's possible to learn these qualities. How do the two aspects balance out?
It's a fascinating question, and in some ways it's like, why did you call it the innovator's DNA? Is that a fixed thing? Well, the reality is it is partly fixed. Researchers who've done some really systematic, careful academic studies on this, they've looked at twins who have been separated at birth, grew up to adulthood in different environments, and then tested them around their creativity and innovation skills. And these research studies basically find that about 25 to 30% of our innovation capacity is a genetic component. It's our DNA. But that's 1/3 of the equation. The other 2/3 is the world we live in. And it's fascinating when we interviewed these famous entrepreneurs to realize that they grew up in worlds where adults paid attention to these innovation skills. Jeff Bezos had grandparents who taught him and reinforced to him that experimentation matters. He lived on a farm with them in the summertime, and when things broke down, they fixed the things that broke down. They learned when you try and experiment, you can figure out a solution. Arik Gadish, who's the chairwoman of Bain Consulting, she grew up in a family where questioning was everything, and it was reinforced to her that she questioned. So they both not only had some genetics around these skills, but they grew up in a world that said, keep them, pay attention to them, use them, do something with them. And then when they became adults, they actually went out and did something with them. And so it's a combination of who we are combined with the world we live in, partly when we're growing up, partly when we become adults. And it doesn't have to be that our family reinforced this. It could be that we simply had a manager who paid attention to our ideas and reinforced and rewarded them through these actions.
Welcome back, everybody, and today we're back in the Book of Innovation, and today we're going to be looking at models of innovation. Now, as we looked at last week, really creativity comes from a process and not just a personality. In fact, we're getting away from the idea that special people and special times and events really produce creativity. Really, it's just a process. So we recognize the broader scope of creativity today as involving everybody in the process of trying to make life easier or trying to create new things from really areas of expertise and knowledge that you want to improve upon. Now, there are 4 stages in the creative process. First is the preparation stage, and as you see here, this is where you refine your goals, where you've faced that goal may be an issue or a question that you've faced. It's where you start to collect data, and they talk about here secondary and primary sources of data. And really, primary data is going to the individual or object itself and collecting data. Secondary data is literature or research that's done that talks about that primary data. And the aim here is to just broaden your view, to educate yourself better about that, whatever it is you want to innovate or create. And then you have the incubation stage. And this is where you just set everything down and you let it percolate, as we used to say in the old days. You've gathered the data, you've done the research, and you've bounced it off of your ideas. Now you just put everything aside and just start letting it form in your mind what you want to have happen. Now, what I do in ministry as a pastor, I do my research on whatever topic I'm going to be preaching on, and then I walk away from it. My creativity doesn't come from just sitting behind a desk and writing down, jotting notes, reading the Bible, and taking the verbs and the Greek and the Hebrew and all of that. Once I have all the information there and I've read through it, then I just put it aside. And then I just dwell on it. I think about it. And God really helps out with it because it brings me to a point where I don't have to be under a time constraint, things just come to mind. How does creation and today's view on creation fit? Well, I can read about creation, but it's really not going to really form in my mind in today's world until I've had a chance to really think about it. And that's after I've put everything away and ideas start to come to mind. The illumination stage is really the eureka stage. They talk about it doesn't happen in a eureka moment, and that's true to a large extent. But here is where you become aware of the answer to the problem or what it is you're wanting to do. And here you start to really glean the benefits of the thought process, because now you're turning that concept into a doable reality. The verification stage is where you evaluate the result from the criteria that you set at the beginning. And really, this is just testing it out to make sure it meets or exceeds or really conforms to what you want to have done in the first place when it comes to that innovation or that creativity. Now, Amival has a 5-stage componential model that really is the same thing that we saw from this last model, but we'll go through it. The problem presentation really is something that's presented to you either externally, and they talk about maybe your supervisor or can give you a problem, or maybe you have discovered something that you want to have answered. Maybe you've had a problem in the past that or a problem that comes to you that you want to answer. Well, this is where the problem presentation comes into play. Preparation. This is where you start to collect data, and that data really compiles that your research, and these are the things that you will need to let formulate in your mind, just as we saw a while ago, as we set it aside. But you do need to prepare by getting the information there. Response generation, and this is where you come up with possible ideas appropriate to the question. This is what's called in business, in the decision-making process, alternatives. You're coming up with all types of alternatives. You're looking at all types of possibilities at this point. Brainstorming can come into play at this point. But here you are trying to come up with a broad range of ideas that can address this situation. And then the 4th stage is to validate the idea or the alternative that you've chosen. And then you check it for its appropriateness and validity. And that's by getting out and testing it and making sure that this is what you have tried to, this is what you want to do, and this is what you've tried to attempt to do, and you were successful in doing so. Assessing the outcome is the evaluation, and this is where you can go back. If the response is found, as you see here, to be wholly appropriate, then the outcome will be accepted and the process ends. However, if it's not, then you go back to the drawing board. You go back to the initial stage, and then you just go through it again until the right answer is identified. When you think about it, creativity is really no different than anything else that we engage in, especially when we look at it as a process. Before you do anything, you're going to prepare for whatever it is you're going to do. You're going to start to think about it, and you're going to start to let those thoughts bring about ideas, and those ideas will spur you on to action. Well, that's what creativity is. So it's something that everyone engages in. We just don't think about it that much. Well, I hope that we're spurring on your creative motives and bringing about the creativity in you that's needed today in business and in ministry. So Next week, we'll go back to development and change, and then next Thursday, we'll continue on with innovation and creativity. Until then, have a good weekend, and we'll see you next week.